Hi, this is Dan Smith of DPS Legal Counsel, and welcome to today's video, which is part of my Legal Scrubs podcast series. This is a podcast and a video that is focused on providing some hopefully helpful information to healthcare providers in the conduct and operation of their small businesses, which is essentially what small independent healthcare practices are, whether you're a doctor, a dentist, or an advanced practice registered nurse. And so today I'm going to be talking about what has come to be known as the DPC model, or the direct primary care model of the practice of medicine. Essentially, if you boil it all down, direct primary care is a payment model that a growing number of doctors are adopting in order to escape from the bureaucracy and the paperwork and the overhead and you might say business nightmare of dealing with insurance regulations, insurance companies, all the paperwork that goes with submitting claims to insurance companies for payment and waiting for that to be paid and dealing with all their rules and regulations. And so a growing number of doctors are going out on their own and either transitioning into a direct primary care model, or they may be doctors who just decide to start a brand new practice from scratch as a direct primary care model. And essentially in a direct primary care practice, or a DPC practice, the doctor or the healthcare practice takes payment directly from the patient. That's why it's called direct primary care, rather than receiving payment through the intermediary of an insurance company. And so the DPC, or the direct primary care practice, involves having the doctors or the practice enter into patient agreements with their patients, and the patients would then pay them directly for their services. And typically what direct primary care practices do is to charge a monthly subscription fee, or just basically a fee for being a part of the membership of the practice. Being a patient of the practice, the patients would pay typically either a monthly or an annual fee, and then a suite of services would be provided for that membership. There could be additional services that would be additional cost to the patient, and those would be spelled out in the patient agreement. There could be a list of certain services that are over and above what is covered through the membership or the subscription, and that would be set out. But essentially all the funds coming into the practice, all the payments flowing out, would be from the patient directly to the practice without any involvement from insurance companies. And so if you're either thinking about transitioning your traditional model of a healthcare practice, which essentially involves payments through insurance, commercial insurance carriers, and Medicare, other governmental payors, or if you were thinking about starting a direct primary care practice from scratch, one of the first issues you have to consider is, what do you do with Medicare? Because if you're going to have a pure model, a pure cash-only model for your direct primary care practice, that leaves out the possibility of getting payments through the Medicare system. And so, and the Medicare rules and regulations are such that if you see Medicare patients, you have to submit claims to Medicare, and you can't charge additional fees or costs to a Medicare patient for any covered service. And so if your practice is one that's going to want to have Medicare eligible or Medicare patients in your practice as patients, then you're going to have to think long and hard about how you deal with this issue of Medicare. Now, there are essentially probably three ways that a healthcare practice that is wanting to either transition to or become straight off the bat from scratch a direct primary care practice. There are essentially three possible ways that you can deal with the issue of Medicare. Number one is you can decide that you are just not going to see and treat and accept as patients anybody who is on Medicare. And that's certainly a possibility for some practices. It does limit your ability to follow your patients from young patients all the way through Medicare beneficiaries at 65 and older. But that is one option, is just to say, I'm going to have a direct primary care practice and we are just not going to accept Medicare patients. That's one possibility. A second possibility is to say, yes, we're going to accept Medicare patients, but in order to do that, you would have to do one of two things. And so this is the second possibility. You could potentially have Medicare patients, but just make sure that you don't provide if you're going to have a direct primary care that's pure, cash only, then you would have to be 100% certain and extremely cautious that you are not providing any covered services to the Medicare patient. In other words, anything that is a covered service under Medicare, you could not provide that service to that patient, because if you do, then you are required by Medicare to submit claims to Medicare and not to charge any additional amounts for that service. And so if you are going to accept a Medicare patient into your practice, you want to be a pure direct primary care practice in which no payments come in from any insurance payer or from Medicare or the government, then you're going to have to be 100% certain that you provide them with no covered services. That are, in other words, no services that are covered by Medicare can you provide to that patient. If you do, and you're charging them a monthly fee or an annual fee to be a patient in your group, you're going to have a problem, because then you're accepting some payment in addition to Medicare. And if you're not also ready to submit claims to Medicare and accept payment from Medicare because you want to be a pure direct primary care practice, you're going to have a problem. And so it's so difficult and so risky for healthcare providers to draw the line between what is a covered service and what is not a covered service, that this option is really not an option that I would ever recommend to anyone. It's a problem. And so I would say that I throw it out there as theoretically possible, but I would say that it's not something that I would suggest in any way. So I would say that for most people, and for the carefully prudent healthcare provider, you really don't want to draw the line between what's a covered service, what's not a covered service, and only provide non-covered services to Medicare patients, because you're going to make a mistake more than likely, and you're going to get in trouble with the government. So I would say don't do that. So you're back to option one, which is just don't accept Medicare patients. So what do you want to do if you do want to accept Medicare patients? Well, I would say in that case, you have really two options. You can decide you're not going to be a pure direct primary care practice and have what's called a hybrid practice, where you have members who pay monthly or annual fees, and they're on a cash pay only methodology, and you have Medicare patients in which you file claims with Medicare and accept Medicare payments for those patients, but don't charge them the membership fee, don't charge them the monthly or the annual. You basically have two separate methods of payment in your practice, one for Medicare patients, which is through the Medicare system, and one for everybody else, which is cash only. So you would have a hybrid direct primary care, not a pure direct primary care. So that's really an option. So one option is don't accept Medicare patients. The second option is accept Medicare patients, but don't have a pure direct primary care model. Have a hybrid model where you have a cash only membership model for non-Medicare patients, and you have a Medicare practice which bills Medicare and accepts Medicare payments only from those patients that are Medicare patients, so that you don't bill them, you don't charge them for the monthly or the annual membership. But in that case, you have a hybrid, not a pure direct primary care. If you want to accept Medicare patients, and you want it to be a pure direct primary care model, which is everybody pays cash only, you don't file claims with Medicare, you don't accept payments from Medicare, then your final option is this, that you have to opt out of Medicare, opt out of the Medicare system. And if you do that, then you can accept Medicare patients. You can have them as members paying their monthly or their annual payments. You would not bill or file for Medicare. You would have a contract with your patient who is a Medicare patient that they won't seek payment from Medicare. You would have to be very clear to have that in your patient agreement with your Medicare patients, that they will not seek payment from Medicare. They won't submit anything to Medicare. In other words, the Medicare system will not be charged. And of course, like I said, you have to yourself as a healthcare provider opt out expressly from the Medicare system. We won't go into the details today of how that opt-out is done. We'll save that for another episode when we have a little more time to go into that. But I'll just say that you would have to opt out of Medicare if you want to have Medicare patients as full cash-only members of your direct primary care practice. If you opt out of Medicare, then you're out for at least 2 years. You can't come back in to being a Medicare participating provider for 2 years after you opt out. So it's a big decision. So if you're getting ready to start a direct primary care practice, one of your very first decisions, maybe your very first decision, is how are you going to deal with Medicare patients? Are you going to just say no Medicare patients for our practice, or are you going to say we're going to have a hybrid model and have direct pay patients who are non-Medicare patients, and we're going to accept Medicare only from Medicare patients and bill Medicare for those patients? Or third, are you going to just opt out of Medicare so that everyone can be a member and a cash-only patient of your practice and have a pure direct primary care practice? This is complicated, I know it is, but I hope this makes sense. I hope this answers some questions you might have. If you are considering a direct primary care practice, again, Medicare, what you do with Medicare is one of the first things you have to decide. And then the other big thing you have to decide is what is going to be in your patient agreement. Because if you're setting up a direct primary care practice, the primary, most important document you're going to have is your patient agreement with your patients. That is going to spell out what they pay and for what. You know, what's included in their monthly or annual fee and what's not included and what the charges are for that. And if you are accepting Medicare patients, but only on a pure direct primary care model so that they pay the monthly fee or the annual fee and you don't bill Medicare, then you're going to have to make sure you have in your patient agreement with those Medicare patients an agreement and an understanding by that Medicare beneficiary that you are not submitting claims for Medicare. They are not going to submit claims. Medicare is not going to pay for what is done in your practice, and they're not going to seek to have Medicare pay for what's done in your practice. No one is going to charge Medicare for that service, and so that has to be in your patient agreement as well. I hope that helps. Again, we'll talk another time about what goes into a good patient agreement for a direct primary care practice. But until then, if you have any questions, you can check me out on dpslegalcounsel.com. I hope this Legal Scrubs podcast is interesting and informative to all the healthcare providers out there. I enjoy doing these. I'll be back soon. We'll talk about that patient agreement for direct primary care practices. Until then, have a great day.